There's been a recent resurgence of space-related video games nowadays, as you can see through the remake of Dead Space, the Callisto Protocol, and the upcoming Aliens Dark Descent. Instead of taking the action-heavy horror approach, developers Kyoken decided to go the more peaceful narrative route with the newest project, Deliver Us Mars. For those unfamiliar, this is a sequel to 2018's Deliver Us the Moon, and is a narrative-driven adventure game that focuses heavily on puzzle solving and platforming. In many ways, this follow-up is more ambitious and improved upon compared to its predecessor, but in other ways, this game suffers from the same flaws, so let's dive right in.
Just slamming each pickaxe as hard as you can, one after the other. Fantastic moon there!
Deliver Us Mars is set 10 years after the event of Deliver Us the Moon, and you play as protagonist Kathy Johnson, an astronaut sent on a mission to Mars after a distress signal is received. Earth's atmosphere is dying, and Mars holds vital information on reversing climate change and houses recolonization ships known as ARCs. The interesting caveat is that your father abandoned you when you were just a child, and blasted off to Mars after joining a mysterious group called the Outward. You haven't heard a word from him since, motivating you to discover something personal on this journey. So you're off to the giant red planet with a team of 3 other astronauts, but things never go as planned, and you are forced to crash land on the planet's sandy dunes. If you've played the developer's previous game, you'd know the sequel is entirely narrative-driven and puzzle-heavy. There are no enemies or combat, so don't come into this adventure expecting an action-oriented science fiction experience. The puzzles, for the most part, are quite varied and require some thought. However, things begin relatively simple as you're introduced to the various mechanics. Obstacles usually boil down to a locked door that you need to pass. You have a laser equipped to your spacesuit to cut away debris or open locked panels, in addition to a robot companion named Ayla. You assume control of it at any time to scout out other areas or even find hidden vents. Utilizing Ayla is essential to solving some otherwise unintuitive puzzles. There are some inconsistencies with difficulty here, considering how some puzzles are way too easy and others are unnecessarily obtuse. Without spoiling too much, other riddles include placing laser beam splitters and diffusion panels to power open doors. One thing the developers nailed is the game's effective atmosphere building. This game makes you feel like an astronaut, from blasting your rocket off Earth and going through the different launch controls and procedures to navigating through zero-gravity space. The ambient music and excellent voice acting maintain the tension and immersion of every dire situation. Elise Champel, the voice actress and motion capture for Kathy, does a fantastic job as the main protagonist. The well-paced and engaging narrative keeps the ball rolling with effective flashback sequences to when Kathy was a child, to provide more context and background on important key characters. The game made it irresistible to see Kathy's story until the end, and it did not disappoint. Deliver Us Mars takes many mechanics from its predecessor. Like in the first game, you'll be switching between first and third person perspectives. In addition, collectibles including old chat logs, letters, emails, books, and decrypted holograms provide more insight into the narrative and characters that once inhabited these abandoned buildings. Yes, you can jump in this game, so bounce to your heart's desire. The significant difference between this sequel and Deliver Us the Moon is Mars, as it includes a bit of verticality. You're equipped with handy climbing axes to navigate the red planet's rocky surface. I'll admit, climbing does take some getting used to, as you'll find yourself falling to your death in the beginning trying to learn the controls. Only certain surfaces are climbable, but they're all visually distinct, so you'll know when you see them. I wouldn't call climbing the same as traditional puzzle solving, but the surfaces are designed so that you have to be careful where you land your next pickaxe thrust. It's a nice change of pace, to say the least, but a welcome addition to gameplay. A major flaw that the first game suffered from was its terrible checkpoint and saving system. Unfortunately, the developers haven't learned from this past criticism, and Deliver Us from Mars lacks a manual save option. The autosave checkpoints aren't too far apart, but if your game crashes or you need to reboot, then get ready to waste time getting back to where you were, because your current progress will be lost. This situation is significantly exacerbated when you launch the game from scratch and accidentally press the new game option on the main menu because your cursor defaults to it. Unfortunately, this will completely override your previous auto checkpoint because there is no load game option. Thankfully, there is a chapter select, but that forces you to start over from the beginning of a chapter, still wasting time. It's a bit astonishing to see Deliver Us from Mars launching on last-gen consoles considering how choppy and unimpressive it is on PlayStation 5. Load times are serviceable, with above-average speeds, but nothing to write home about. What's inexcusable is the constant stuttering and screen tearing that the game suffers from. Remember, there's no graphical or performance mode to toggle, so it's just this messy experience all the way through. In addition, the game can't keep a smooth and steady frame rate with frequent dips and even the most graphical non-intensive sequences. A day one patch is planned before launch to mitigate some of these issues, so keep that in mind. Facial animations are non-existent, as lips do not move when the characters talk, other than in pre-rendered cutscenes. I recommend you turn up the default brightness as well because there are portions of the game where you have no idea where to go due to how dark it is. Minor DualSense features are used, such as rumbling during climbing, but that's nothing much. Sadly, Deliver Us Mars could barely get us to the planet of Mars itself, let alone deliver it. It's a shame that the game was already delayed once for further polishing and still came in this rough state. The constant frame drops, screen tears, glitches, and poor animation rendering are only the cherry on top of this inconsistent puzzles and terrible lighting. There's something special underneath all this jankiness though, with a focus on engaging storytelling and increased verticality. Still, the developer couldn't get this landing quite right. Noisy Pixel is giving Deliver Us Mars a 5.5 out of 10. Thanks for watching. Please read the full review at noisypixel.net. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers who work hard to deliver news, reviews, previews, and more. Please subscribe to keep up with all our future content.
Noisy Pixel.